Bad Life Podcast! You're listening to the Bad Life Podcast, your number one guide on how to run a profitable band. Here are your hosts, Pete Stannard and Adam West, the Wizard of Rock! Hello, and welcome to the Band Life Podcast. I am your host, Pete Stannard, and I am here with my wonderfully bearded co-host, Mr. Adam West, the Wizard of Rock himself. Enough of that.
I was enjoying that. That's my moment of fame.
It was.
My moment of fame.
It's so, all of your gigs sound like that, surely.
Oh, yeah, of course, Pete.
Every single one.
We was only talking about it last night in practice and how terribly pathetic the music industry is these days.
Oh. Well, we're going to talk about that today. Actually.
I know.
That segues nicely into this episode 20, mate.
I know.
We are on, I'd like to say we're on fire, but...
Well, it's only our two listeners, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, exactly. And they're both trolls.
Hey, you can't say that about your wife. I've met your wife now. She's very lovely.
Said yes. Yes, lovely. Listen, we actually finally met. I was on holiday in Adam's beautiful country of Wales, and we hooked up. Not in a sexual way.
Yeah, we did. Tell them the truth.
We did. We disappeared in the pub for an hour.
Pete, we need likes, mate, and subs. So just tell them something seedy.
Tell them something disgusting. Adam has a very hairy bum. You think the beard? The beard is hairy.
That's true.
You should see his bum. No, I jest. I jest about Adam's bum. But anyway, episode 20. This is actually quite... Considering we've been joking, this is actually quite a serious episode, I think, for music artists and bands anyway. And is the digital era destroying the music industry?
Didn't we cover something vaguely similar to this before?
We have touched on this before, but we've not done an episode that focuses entirely on this. And I think it's important to bring up now, especially what's been happening over the last week or so.
Regale me with your interesting stories, sir.
I will, but all will be revealed, I think, as we go on through the episode.
We just like to tell. Hang on, we just like to tell our listeners it is absolutely boiling hot, right? So if suddenly I go from luscious pink, right, to bright red, you'll know why, all right?
Is the digital era destroying the music industry? And my personal opinion is that this is kind of a yes/no question. But I think what we have to do in this episode is we're just going to go over the positives and the negatives, and then we'll weigh everything up at the end and go yes or no.
Yeah, that's fine, mate. Instead of the...
I think that's kind of the fairest way of doing it. So I want to give them a fair crack. I want to give this era of music a fair crack because I think there are a lot of positives. But like anything, nothing's perfect, is it, mate, at the end of the day? So
no, it is not.
Far from perfect with everything that's going on in the world at the moment. I think there's kind of four main areas that the digital era has had an impact on. There are probably more, but we've only got a limited amount of time. Obviously, we've got production, distribution, marketing, and general consumption. That's kind of the main areas where digital has hit. What I want to do is, so we get a full scope. Obviously, there are going to be some listeners out there that are younger than us, I would hope, and they don't. They're born in a time where the digital era was here, basically.
Yeah.
So you could say that digital era kind of came in around when the internet was kind of taking off in a
When was
way.
the old Napster thing and
The Napster
MP3s?
stuff was like
90s, wasn't it?
late 90s. Yeah, mid to late 90s,
Yeah. Okay.
something like that, all that sort of thing. Talk about those four different areas. We'll look at how it was pre-digital, what it's like now, and then weigh up the pros and cons of that within each area. Each area of production, distribution, marketing, and consumption. We'll run through that. It's my turn to slap someone.
Since I don't have control of the button,
You don't have button. You will next time.
I've only been.
You're gonna have button control. Oh no, actually no. You should have button control this time. But you can say yes or no. Basically, if you disagree, there will be no slap, and I will hang my head in shame, and I don't know, get on with my life probably.
Let's hear it then. What's the slap?
Well, the slap will come in time. What I want to start with is the main topic. So,
go.
First thing we're going to start with is production. So, music production. If you don't know what music production is, it's how we produce music. So, it's recording, mixing, mastering, and all that sort of stuff. Digital music production and working in recording studios actually started way before things like Spotify and stuff came along. Pro Tools came in the early 90s. I think the first inception of Pro Tools was in 92, something like that. And it wasn't great. Even when I came into the industry in the late 90s, the early 2000s. So when I was going into studios doing sessions and stuff, they kind of had Pro Tools, but it was rarely used, mainly because it was really sluggish and you had to wait for things to render down and all the rest of it. And in those sorts of studios, time was money. And if you're waiting 20 minutes for a guitar track to render down, you're like, okay, that's just cost me a few £100.
That's true though. I mean, I think the way as far as we've come at the moment with the digital era and production, we're at that point now where it's where we covered it in one of the podcasts, wasn't it? Where it's doing really well, and now people are doing it in their homes because the technology is there to do it. As you say, it's less sluggish. There's programs now, like the PCs now. They're all SSDs, solid state drives, and they're super fast. I got one of mine, and it's just wow, and all that sort of stuff helps, and people now can zip through their recording production really well. So shame it's taking so long, but
Yeah, and again, that's kind of an upside from a music production or a music producer's point of view or an engineer's point of view. That's a massive advantage because your workflow becomes much quicker.
Sure,
so you can bring your costs down, which makes it better for artists in general. But before all of that came in, everything was done analog. Now, if you don't know what analog is, turning sound waves into an electrical current, and then that electrical current either gets put out into the speakers, so your speakers then turn the electrical current back into sound waves, or it's fed to what would be a tape machine, and it will be recorded into that tape machine, and that's how you would record it. But these sorts of equipment, like mixing consoles, tape machines, they're huge. Immense great things that were very, very expensive.
You've always got somebody somewhere that's got that set up somewhere. I've noticed that with the internet. It's great. I've seen people go, let me show you my setup. And you look at it and you're like, man, that must have cost you a lot of credits to set that up. Because people like a bit of old school. And the same with vinyl, like the vinyl players. And they got it all set up. And I'm like, Walkmans is another one I've seen on Instagram. There's a page now. Well, there's these companies showing up now that putting into production cassettes again, right? And there's like new machinery with obviously based on the old tech. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. It'll never go away, I don't think. But in terms of like what you were saying, you kind of need to shrink it down and make the cost a bit better. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So you obviously you still have what would be considered now boutique studios, and obviously you have what would be considered the legacy studios like Abbey Road and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, South by Southwest and that sort of thing. The reason that obviously people weren't bedroom producers back then was because you
No,
just couldn't
space.
have these things in the house. There's no space for it. It's massively expensive. Even today, if you buy a big like an SSL console, the top of the range SSL console is like 120 grand. You know, it's not cheap. At the end of the day, it's not cheap to buy. It's not cheap to maintain, and all the rest of it. So you have to have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of clientele. And you're only going to be going to major artists with that, to be honest. The other part of it is back then as well, recording studios, you know, they're all soundproofed and everything else. You know, you'd have things like echo chambers. Abbey Road still has an echo chamber in Studio 2, I believe. To have that in a home, you have it to an extent of some, people use, I put a mic in my bathroom and I use that as an echo chamber sort of thing. It's an equivalent sort of thing. Whether you get the same effect as you would at Abbey Road is up for debate. Broadly speaking, before the digital era, if you wanted to go into a recording studio, they were big, expensive places, and only a select few artists had the money to do that. And that's because generally they were signed and a record company was paying for it. They were loaning the money, or they were advancing the money to the artists so that they could go into those sorts of places. This means that, obviously only established artists and the companies, they were essentially the gatekeepers of recorded music at that time. Because, if they didn't think that they could make money from you or exploit you, as the terminology would be, you wouldn't get the money. Not a lot has changed, to be honest. It's still very much that kind of attitude at the end of the day.
It hasn't really changed, does it? It's very sad.
From a financial point of view, if anything, it's worse. Yeah, because the margins are now much more narrow for record companies, especially independents. So back in the day, you didn't have music production that was accessible to everyone like it is today. It was because it was very big, very expensive. You had to go into very specific buildings and things like that. Everything was soundproof. The advantages now is that you can. Recording has become far more accessible. To be honest with you, I wouldn't be doing this without the digital era, because I couldn't afford 120 grand for a desk, another 60 grand for a tape machine, another, and all the rest of it. The setup costs for having a bricks and mortar studio would be way too high without the digital era. For me to say that the digital era is completely a negative thing would be hypocritical, because I have used digital stuff. I use digital stuff every day, and I get paid to do what I do. And the digital era has enabled me to, and many other producers, to do that. The pros here are it's far more accessible. The cons are it's far more accessible because now what we have is a saturation within the market on the production side. So you have way more producers and engineers than you did before.
There's no balance now, is it?
Yeah. But and the other side of that, I suppose, as the counter of that, is that you have far more bands and artists that can record. You kind of have a little bit of a leveling off from that perspective, because you've got way more bands now than you did back in the day. To be honest,
too many, man.
Yeah, but the downside of that, because you have so many engineers and producers and things like that, you have a lot of engineers and producers that just don't have the knowledge and the experience to produce something that will be considered good quality recording, which I think is a massive problem when you couple that with distribution and stuff like that, because there doesn't seem to be a gatekeeper on
No,
the
there's not.
quality.
Interesting, mate. Very interesting. There's not.
Yeah, exactly. So I always make the joke I could fart in a can and get it onto Spotify.
And you'd make more money.
Is that music? I suppose that depends on your opinion. So I think overall the positives are more artists can record their music, but the downside is that the quality of production has dropped immensely, in my opinion. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yes, I do agree with it. Saturation is the problem, I think. Right? I think we've as artists and musicians, people. It's a bit like this, right? You know, when you start from the bottom and work to the top, you've always got a gradual increase before you get to the apex, and that applies to absolutely anything. And what happens today is that everybody can race to the top and become number one straight away, and you're like, oh, great, okay, so where do you go from there? So the problem I have, like, is the saturation level of things. Now you've got bands and artists and musicians going, right, so what's current and what's trendy? Right, I can top that. So that everyone is trying to top the next, the current big thing. And it gets to the point now when I'm like there's no originality. It's all about competing for the most part. Now they'll tell you a small percentage, like, no, it's very passionate to me. It's like, right, but everything just seems to be outdoing somebody else. Like, now there didn't appear to be any of that in the say the 80s and 90s with metal, right? You found that people were just like, they just wanted to write music and play fast and heavy, and it's great. Now it's, well, who looks the best on stage? Who's more technically brilliant? And it's just like, you know, and now it's got to the point where bands can't even play their own stuff live because they're using backing tracks to play because they're so damn fast because they're trying to compete. And it's got to the point where I'm like, oh man, slow down. I can't deal with this. Like, it's not even fun to listen to anymore. So for me, I think, to answer your question, yes. And I think saturation is the problem. I think it's just everybody's got it. And the opportunity to, and as you say, there's no gatekeeper and there's no gradual process. They're all skipping Old Kent Road and zipping back around to collect their £200 and straight at the top. And you're just like, and I think that is a big problem because now everybody is, it's like a mass stampede of people all, and you're like, wow.
And I think that there is a big influx of people looking for a quick quid. But that's not to say that there aren't artists out there who are doing it, you know, for the art, that want to craft their songs and want to kind of build their way from the bottom. The problem is that bottom is so heavily saturated that, you know, a lot of artists just give up. The next part was distribution. For those who don't know what distribution is, when you put your music out, that's distributing your music. And the digital era is very different from before the digital era. Historically, global distribution was, again, only for a small select few bands, and these were called stratospheric bands. That means that they were putting their music out globally. What you need to understand is that record companies controlled distribution. And to be clear, before the digital era, the way people bought music was through physical products. Okay, so CDs, vinyls, cassettes, mini discs, Adam's favorite. So we are not, at this portion of the conversation, we are not talking about streaming. Okay, so the way that it worked was artists back then would sign to a record label or a record company, but they would also sign a distribution deal. Now, some deals, it would be a separate deal. Some deals, it would be kind of baked in with their record deal. Now, that meant that artist would have access to the logistical distribution that record company could provide. That means boxing up record, putting it on the back of a lorry, and that lorry driving around to all the different record shops in that territory and dropping those records off, okay, for those retailers to sell to the general public. As artists signed bigger record deals, they would get bigger distribution networks. The way that it would work is the distribution deals would be broken down into territories. So, for example, let's say that you're a UK band, okay? You would sign to an indie label, okay, because you knew. That indie label would distribute probably just within the UK. If that record was successful, they may sign to a larger label that would then distribute to Europe as an extended territory, or that independent label would sign a distribution deal with a bigger company that would then have access to that market. So that distribution would be much wider. If then you're successful in Europe, they would probably look to the US and Asia and things like that, Australasia and those different markets to see where you could basically break as a band, where they could sell those records. If you had every territory that you could be distributed in, you were called a stratospheric band or a stratospheric artist.
Which was a large proportion of those during the 80s and 90s anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah, so you're talking the Metallicas, the U2s, those sorts of things. And it would work. I saw an interview once with Bryan Adams, who was a stratospheric artist.
Yeah, he did quite well in the day, didn't he?
He did very well in the early 90s in particular, late 80s, early 90s. But I saw an article that they dropped certain territories from his distribution deal. So he lost the US, but he was still in Canada and Europe and things like that, because he wasn't so popular anymore in those countries. So they were like, well, why would we distribute you there? It doesn't make sense. No one's buying it.
It's business, yeah. Like business. You said, you got to keep it separate business.
You've got to roll. You've got to roll with it. With the advent of streaming, so we're bringing this into the 21st century, 2025.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have streaming now, which has had an impact, sadly, I think, that we have much less music shops now. The retail element has gone. It's certainly not what it was. And that's because these distribution networks have collapsed. It's as simple as that, which also has an economic problem as well, because of the ways the economics of the music industry is that money is a trickle down economy. So money is recycled through the industry, and a way that major record labels would make a lot of money is through these distribution deals from other record companies. Once that's gone, there's less money for those record companies to invest in bands and artists in the form of, well, royalties and advances and everything else. It has a negative impact from that perspective. The distribution payments aren't being made, and instead of going to what would be that money that would be going to the major record labels, are now going to Spotify and Apple Music.
Hey, is their favorite platform?
Which is big tech companies. And this is why the economics are important and why I mentioned it, because these companies don't sign artists. The money that they make doesn't get invested back into the music industry. It gets invested into big tech. So a really good example of that is Daniel Ek from Spotify. He has invested in the private healthcare industry. And like I was saying earlier, just this week, he has invested over 600 million euros or 700 million US dollars in AI military defense. I wonder why.
Hang on, backtrack here. The founder of Spotify, is that?
Founder and CEO of Spotify has just invested 600 million euros in AI military defense.
Military. Sorry, man.
Not the music industry.
So I'm going to put a post up on that. Is
If you add that to the 300 million he's invested into the private healthcare sector,
The healthcare.
so he has, I mean, he's made that money from the music industry, and that's like $1 billion. So
Well,
he
he's met-
sucked $1 billion. This is just one man. Okay. I'm not talking about big tech in general. This is just one man. He has sucked $1 billion out of the music industry and put it somewhere else.
Pete, this is shocking. You got to do a short, mate, of this. And post this. That is f***ing crazy, mate. I
Yeah.
did not know that.
You didn't know that? Well, you got to keep up with the news, my friend.
I know, mate. You need to send me some links. I don't know what go on what's news anymore. Like, you know.
The thing about it is you have to be a little bit invested. You have to do a little bit of research just to make sure that it's not all BS.
Indeed,
at the end of the day. But this has been verified by many, many people. And
Jeff Bezos, who's what's his company?
Amazon.
Amazon, that's it. Jeff Bezos, Amazon.
That little known that little known company called Amazon. Yeah. Yeah, one of the richest men in the world. This is my big problem.
I'm so glad it came off Spotify. Me, I can't believe it.
But it still, even though you're not on it, as a music artist, it directly affects you, because now the industry, just from Daniel Ek alone, has had $1 billion taken out of it. And when
I wonder if the Music Venue Trust knows about that.
I don't think the Music Venue Trust.
Oh, I'm gonna have fun this weekend.
They probably know about it, but they can do bugger all about it.
But even
at the end of the day, it's his money. That's like the Venue Music Trust saying that, you know, you can't buy your house because there's not enough money in the music industry.
Yeah, but that's money from people like me and you, right?
Yeah.
So we've actually helped invest in AI military. Wonderful.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know.
I'd say that, yes, that's a big downside, okay, for the digital era. The upside for the digital era is that artists can distribute globally. So what was a very small niche of artists, like the Metallicas, the U2s, the Guns N' Roses, you know, these type of bands, you can do the same thing that they were doing to this day. You can do that right now. And it's amazing that you can distribute your music globally from your phone. I think that's an amazing thing for music artists. I think that's
myself.
Great. You can reach billions of people. Yeah, that's an amazing thing. But again, I'm torn by that, because anyone and everyone can do it. So the saturation level is currently through the roof.
What do we do?
What do we do? Well, let's look at the numbers first, mate. Okay. How many songs, if you're looking at the notes, you're going to get this. But how many songs do you think are released every day?
Well, I'm not going to look at the notes. I'm going to be as shocked and surprised as the listener. Okay.
Go on then. Take a guess.
Run the question by me again.
How many songs do you think are released every day?
I'm going to be... it's got to be high, isn't it? Because, I mean, we're factoring in the AI scenario. I would say it is definitely well over 1 million songs a day.
No, it's not that high.
No,
that would be mind-blowing. But it is at 120,000 songs per day.
I thought it would have been a bit more than that.
And that's a huge amount of song. Do you think about every time when you release a song, you are competing with 120,000 other songs. Yeah, just let that kind of sink in a little bit. When you release a song and you put on Instagram, go listen to my song, there are 120,000 other people doing exactly the same thing.
You're such a killjoy, you are, Pete.
I know. And that is every day. The next day, and people wonder, why does no one remember that I put this post out? It's like, well, because 120,000 people did that on the day, and then another 120,000 people did it the day after. You know, no wonder it gets lost. in the noise of what it is. And I still don't think AI has fully kicked in yet. I think
A
the
bundle of joy
million.
you are.
I know. I really do hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Yeah, well,
Honestly, I think when you couple that with AI, and you also put in the decrease in quality of music, I think the problems are completely exacerbated. Once you couple that, what people are hearing are like, well, that sounds with, there's a whole load of stuff that sounds, then it becomes a bigger problem. People just switch off from it like that.
yes, I've been a classic example of it, and it's not because I'm an asshole or anything. It's because it just doesn't resonate.
Yeah.
And it's like an innate feeling, isn't it? You know, it's like when people say, "Look, just trust your insides, your gut, and all that." And so, what I've found is when it comes on, it just doesn't resonate, and psh, I'm shut off.
Shall we move on? We move on.
Yeah, it's fine, it's fine.
Let's
Yeah.
go to my slap. Adam, are you ready for this? Do you remember a man called Nick Clegg?
Nick Clegg.
Nick Clegg.
Is he a politician?
He is, or he was,
he
a
was,
politician.
What's he done?
Was the former deputy prime minister. Well, you remember when there was a coalition here in the UK? There was a coalition between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Party. Nick Clegg was the head of the Liberal Democrats at that point, and when they formed the coalition, he was made deputy prime minister. After he left politics, he went to work for Meta. He was an executive at Meta. He no longer works for them now. But he was in the press recently saying that if AI companies have to pay for music licenses, it would basically kill the AI industry because it would be too expensive for them and they shouldn't have to pay because it would be killing the AI industry. Do you know what I say to them? Boo f***ing who, mate? It's as simple as that. Pay for your licenses. Everyone else has to. If I wanted to use someone else's music, I would have to pay a license for it. Why should these companies not pay a license? That doesn't make sense. Why should the AI companies get a free pass? Yeah,
Because they're richer than you, Pete. How could you be so selfish? Just because you don't have any money, okay?
But that's
Such a politician denier, aren't you?
Even more the point, they have lots of money. So why shouldn't they pay for, basically, they're using your music to model their AI. And there was actually a lawsuit put in day before yesterday. All the majors put in a lawsuit against Suno and what's the other one? Uno.
I think I heard something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big lawsuit going through at the moment. They're saying that it's not fair use for them to do it like that because they are making money. It's not fair for them to make huge amounts of money off of music artists, or more importantly, from them. So
I wonder if it was the Music Venue Trust that posted that. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere about that. Well, okay, so
so my slap is for Nick Clegg for standing up for the AI industry and thinking that they shouldn't pay. The question is, give him a slap. There you go, Nick Clegg. Have it, sunshine. You suck. You're a dick.
You're a politician.
And face facts. Just because you want to make more money, you can go and do one. Okay?
Justified.
Justified. That's enough of that. But I see the other thing about this is as well is that what concerns me is how much influence these AI companies have within politics. Because Donald Trump 2 weeks ago fired the head of the copyright agency.
Get out.
He didn't even do that. He sent her an email that said one word, terminated. Right? All because she wrote a briefing saying that AI companies are not it's not fair use for AI companies to use music just released music to train their AIs.
And
So
he terminated her contract.
he fired her because of that, because she did her job basically as the head of copyright in the US. Marketing, which I feel has been impacted, oddly enough, with the advent of social media. Let's look at before the digital era. So before the digital era, marketing your music fell into these main areas would be print, television, and radio. Simple. You didn't have, a myriad of social media platforms to advertise on. In our world, Adam, in the rock and metal world, print magazines would be things like Rolling Stone, Kerrang, Enemy, Metal Hammer, and things like that.
Yeah.
Radio would be terrestrial stations, obviously, like the BBC, Absolute, K-Rock in the States would be a thing. Television, obviously, would be MTV. MTV, remember that?
My brother
MTV.
used to do some stuff with MTV, funny.
Oh, really? Nice. Saturday Night Live in the States. But my favourites when I was young. And
wee lad, when you was a wee lad.
When I was a wee lad and we only had four stations. That was it. 4 channels. Do you remember those days?
Go and change the channel for son. Oh, God, I don't like this. That's all I spent. No one of my legs if I get shot to pieces.
Yeah. No remote control. You had to go to
up
the
and down,
television.
up and down.
Don't like this sort of thing. But my favourites were The Word. And do you remember there was a show called Raw Power? Do you remember that one?
No.
It was. I had to tape it because I was that young. It was on at like 2:00 in the morning. It's probably why it passed you by.
As bad as Eurotrash, that was the best thing ever at in the morning.
It was that sort of thing. But I had to record because my mum and dad wouldn't let me stay up to watch it because it was on in like the early hours. They're like, no,
all the best stuff was though, wasn't it? This is really weird, yeah.
But I heard about bands like Nirvana, right? I first heard the Bleach album on there before Nevermind came out. And that's because they played Blue by Nirvana on there. And I was like, what the hell is that? That is different because everything else on there was hair metal. And then obviously things like Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, Metallica, all that. And it was like specific for rock and metal. And it was called Raw Power. And yeah. And then you obviously, sort of going back to television, obviously you had the various chat shows as well, things like the Jonathan Ross show and the Graham Norton show and things like that, where bands would play like at the end of the show and that sort of thing. Back then, radio was king, which in a way it still is. Still has the largest listenership in the world. But magazines was a great source of information for music fans back then. I remember getting my copy of Kerrang! Back in the day, I remember finishing school on a Wednesday and I would walk a different route home from school so that I could pick up my copy of Kerrang! On the way home. Cool. Every Wednesday that would happen. And it was great because this is where you'd find out about gigs, about what's coming out, and all the rest of it. We didn't have the internet to find these things out. We had to go and buy magazines and do all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And again, you could argue that the digital era has taken all of that away. So the money coming in for those publications.
I was going to start buying actually some magazines again because it was nice at the beginning of the year to sit out in the garden with a cup of coffee, reading. And I did find quite a few bands doing that. I went, God, I remember what this used to be like. Because at least it's all there. Looking for it in the digital world is a nightmare. And I was going to carry on doing it. Unfortunately, the price tag for each magazine was knocking up almost £6. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was a hefty amount in there, but they've gone up so much, I mean, Kerrang! Used to be like, what, £3.50 or something?
Correct. Well, I remember buying Kerrang! It was £1.50?
Yeah. Well, £1.95, yeah. And it's
something like that. Because it wasn't a glossy.
No, it's papery, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very it was very cheaply produced. But they, I didn't mind that. I actually quite liked that. The same with the NME. The NME was very, very much it wasn't like Rolling Stone. That was how we found out information about bands and things like that. These days, obviously, it's all social media and websites, and it's all digital. I suppose the advantage of that is that as a music artist, you can advertise your band 24/7, 365 if you want. Back then, you'd have a weekly publication or a monthly publication, and the adverts would only run once a week, which in a way I think was quite nice in a way.
The world of adverts.
But now, obviously, everything's an advert. People go, oh, I'll put out, so I don't really advertise, but I put out social media posts. It's like, well, that's an advert. Whether again, it's a fact. You're publicizing what you're doing. That's what advertising is. If you're telling someone, here's my music, go listen to it, you're advertising your music. Even if you're not telling people to go listen to your music, you're still advertising your music, because then why put it out? Again, we're back to a saturation problem of everyone's doing it. 101, you release a music, you're going to put it out on social media, aren't you? You're going to say, go listen to my music on Spotify or wherever. And like we said before, every day you've got 120,000 people doing that. You're just background noise, unless you're doing something that's going to create some attention.
Unless you pay.
Or you pay, yeah.
Marketing.
Which is another thing. Now, I think it's become such a backgroundy noise sort of thing. I think we've lost the excitement behind releasing music.
Definitely.
But I don't think people get excited about, I remember seeing like,
They don't. I don't.
seeing, buying a Kerrang magazine and seeing like a band I really liked, they're saying they've got an album coming out like in the summer, and being like, awesome, I'm really looking forward to that and getting excited about it. Now it's just like, all right, it's another band releasing music, and there's no anticipation anymore behind it. Yeah, I think that's really sad. And I think it's because people are just spamming people constantly. It's a constant spam. There's just so much of it that it's just, you switched off from it. Again, I think we're back to a problem of saturation. I think it's great that bands can advertise their music to billions of people. I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
Again, at what cost? I always say, if you're spending more time advertising your music than actually making music, then what are you a musician, or are you a digital marketer?
I think most of us are digital marketers, aren't we?
Probably, if you're going to look at it in that way. And then you need to kind of think along the lines of, well, do I want to be a digital marketer, or do I want to be a musician? And you look at how you can address that. And we go back to why I think the DIY stuff is mental. But if you want to know more about that, go and listen to our old episodes. Because we've spoken about that a lot. And also, not to mention that social media platforms just making huge amounts of money. They're exploiting creativity at the end of the day. I feel a little bit like we're in the upside down, really, to quote Stranger Things, if you've ever watched that. That you've got people that are creating stuff that are making little to no money, but the platforms are making huge amounts of money from that creativity.
We should all come off it, man, and just do it the old-fashioned way.
We should, but you'd have to have some kind of global revolution for that to happen. And there's never been a global revolution in the entire history of human endeavor for that to even work. This is the position that we're in. And this is what I'm saying. These tech giants are in such a dominant place that they are controlling every aspect of everyone's life, whether you're in the music industry or not. If you are on social media and you create social media content, you are at the whim of that social media platform, whether you like it or not. So
That's true.
And that's the reality of of that. And I think that's the downside of marketing. So the upside of the digital era is that you can advertise all day, every day, as much as you want. The downside is that everybody's doing it, and you are at the whim of the social media platforms. If they change their algorithm tomorrow, all your hard work can go away like that. And I've known artists that have huge followings and have lost everything. Even their accounts have been shut down and things like that.
I have you, mate. Yeah.
They are devastated because they've done so much work and they've worked so hard to get to where they're going, and it's just gone because someone's reported them, or you get one jealous guy that's like, oh, I don't like what this person's doing, so I'm going to report them in some way, and they get their account taken down.
There's a lot of that going on, actually.
It's gone. Yeah,
it's quite worrying. Because like you said, the amount of effort that they've put in is staggering. And then like, what do I do? And you're like, they got everyone by the short and curly. It's just like, look, we can do this for you, but if you don't conform, well, they're not going to get anywhere. So
exactly.
There you go. And
there
you're
you
like, what do
like
I do?
it, lump it. Yeah, that's the reality of your life.
Well, I'm so glad you're here to cheer us up with that one, Pete. Thank you very much.
Exactly. On that cheery note,
let's consume.
Let's go on to consumption. Now, for those who don't know what consumption is, it is when you listen to music, you are consuming music. That's the term for people who are listening to music. You are consuming it. You're not doing it via your mouth like you would with food. You're doing it by your ear holes. Music consumption, this kind of brings us back to distribution in a way. Obviously, back in the day, you'd go to a record shop to buy a physical product, and that would be vinyl, cassette, TV, CD, and all the other stuff. And I think the key word in that is buy for me. Yeah. The main reason I got a Saturday job as a teenager was so I could buy music. I'm sure I've said this on this podcast before. I wanted to go and buy music. I said, Mum, could you give me some money so I can buy some music? My dad went, bugger off. I'm not paying for you to listen to that rubbish.
If you want to listen to it, you go get a job.
Exactly. If you want to listen to it, you're going to have to buy it yourself. And I was
That's motivation for you, isn't it?
Okay, then. And to be honest, I loved that. I didn't see that as a bad. I was like, okay, cool.
No, so I mean, it's very encouraging.
I got myself a job, and I love the experience of going to work, earning the money, and then going and buying the thing that I wanted. And I loved that experience. And I don't think, especially younger people now, and I don't want to sound like an old man shouting at the clouds here.
But you are, Pete.
But I probably they have the potential of coming across in that way. I don't think that younger people, I don't think they view music as something that you buy, because you don't. It's as simple as that. Nobody buys.
It. That is very interesting. It's true what you say. We just consume.
We do just consume. And I think that sense of I've earned this right to go and buy this music. I will cherish this more because I've had to I've had to labor to listen to this music. And I think there's a massive difference. This is why music is so disposable now. It's because no one's had to work to actually physically buy the music. You can't really kind of go, oh, I really love this music in that way, because you've not put that amount of effort in to actually go and buy the music. Because even if you pay a subscription to Spotify, again, you're not paying for the music, you're paying not to listen to adverts. Most people don't pay a subscription to Spotify. Most people listen to the adverts.
Hey, because of you, right? The band's no longer on Spotify. Plus, I stopped paying for the premium there.
Yeah,
just to save some money.
Stop because Daniel Ek paying for military AI.
Well, no, I mean, honestly, on a serious note, us having the podcast and discussing it made me come to that decision, because I think it's a lot. When you highlighted and said, look, all you're doing, you're paying the premium basically to not have adverts. I was like, do I really want to do that? I mean, it's like, I'm not, and again, what you just said about consuming the music. So Paradise Lost got a new album coming out. I go on there and listen to the whole thing, and I'm just consuming it. I mean, I do miss, like, I would like to buy the vinyl, and I'm like, yeah, sure, nobody's got 50 quid to fork out for these box sets and stuff anymore.
Yeah.
because everybody's just hammered down with paying somebody else. And not only that, like we don't seem to have, like we don't have a HMV in Newport anymore. Cardiff have one.
Hmm.
Obviously, you got Cumbrain has one. But it would be nice to get back into that flow of things while they're still here. And you're right, people they're not. It's changed so much, and now we consume and consume. We don't seem to care anymore, do we? It's very sad, actually. Very
Yeah,
sad.
yeah, and
Yeah, I do miss the old
again,
days.
kind of going back to that kind of sense of reward
Yeah, sense
that
of
you
reward.
get
Yeah.
from buying music,
We used to sit
because
there, didn't we, and be like, "Ah, it's just
yeah,
cool,
and
rocking like that."
again, and you can go down the road of, oh well, all the artwork and everything else has its
Mm.
place and all the rest of it, and yeah, it does. I love the artwork. Some of them are a bit like, meh, the artwork's not that great, but the album sounds awesome. That sort of thing. But yeah, that's just a matter. That's a subjective taste thing at the end of the day. But I think, yeah, my main point here is that I I feel that music's been devalued so much because people don't have never paid for music in a way. People
Oh no,
stopped
with the
paying for
Prince.
music
Oh,
when Napster started doing this whole sort of file sharing stuff and things like that. It's like, well, why would I pay for something I can get for free? Lars Ulrich from Metallica was right. He was saying, if no one nips this in the bud now, the entire industry will pay long term for this. This will attack grassroots in particular, and at some point it will work its way all the way up to the top. And now the majors are scrambling. If they're bringing lawsuits against AI companies, they're scrambling for trying to make more money and that sort of thing.
well. Lars Ulrich was right.
So, and the other side of that is that I suppose it depends on your point of view about streaming, is that whether
Mm.
or not listening to albums anymore on
It's
streaming
just digital
sites,
code, isn't it?
it's all singles in
Mm.
playlists and things like that. And I feel that if you're not listening to an album, then you're not really appreciating what that artist is putting, because artists traditionally, if you put an album out, it was an entire thing, and
Yeah, now you got the waterfall
you'd
effect thing.
experience that the entire album as it's set out by that artist. The artist has always had a lot of input as to what the actual running order is and how they felt that running order was for that, how that made them feel, and it was a part of the artistic experience, I think. And I think when you just listen to a single, it's a shame because it's almost like looking at a masterpiece but only seeing like 1/12 of it. Could you imagine looking at a Rembrandt or a Dali but only seeing 1/12 of it? You'd be like, it's all right.
Valid point. I
And
mean, they're all
you
doing the
miss,
big bands, aren't they? And you wait and you wait and you wait. You're like, oh, come on. It sounds great. I want to hear the whole thing and develop a story in my head of how this goes. That's why I like
yeah,
concept albums. I think, Wars of the World and some other bands have done it. Anathema. It's really cool. But again, nobody sits. We don't spend the time sitting there and just. I remember sitting like yourself, right, down with my headphones on and the new album, even when it was on CD,
yeah,
and just sitting there and taking it all in. I wasn't on a phone. I was just listening and appreciating it. Then at the end, I'd be like, you never really got that music sort of implanted in you yet. Nothing stuck. So you listen
yeah,
to it again.
yeah,
But now we just consume everything on the go, and
yeah. I do. I try to make time. It's kind of difficult with
cause I know.
three young children, I will admit, but I try to make some time where I just literally just sit down and listen to music. And generally, I do that with vinyl because I'm a
I got it,
snob.
but well, no, it's not snobbery, is it? But it's I think there's something about the tactile stuff and the digital, so
Yeah,
I can resonate. I just
and
need better speakers because mine, very good. I gotta crank
well,
everything up
if
high,
they've
and it's
been mastered properly, everything it should sound good on pretty much anything. But
wow.
um,
Yeah.
But again, I mean, and this is again, like if you listen to our previous podcasts, you would know that I am a big advocate of treating streaming sites like a radio station, rather than putting your album out. Just put what you would consider to be singles out, because that's how people are consuming on those platforms. If someone like me who likes to listen to an album, I will go and buy that album. If all I hear is singles, will I buy that album? Depends on how good the singles are and if the album's available a lot of the time. But I think people will buy albums because there are a lot of people out there that still, like myself and you, that will still go and buy albums. And I think when you're a music artist and you want to create as much revenue as possible, then you need to sort of at least go into those revenue streams. But you got to have the fan base there in the first place. Going back to our fan bases and stuff like that, I would treat them like a place of discovery and just release singles, and hold some stuff back for your fans, because most of your fans aren't on Spotify, or they're on Spotify, but they would still buy your music, if that makes sense. I think overall, I think the digital era on paper,
Right.
to sum this up, I think on paper it sounds awesome. You know, when you think you can distribute globally, you can advertise globally, you can get your music to potentially 7 billion people, there or thereabouts, that sort of thing, it sounds awesome. But once you dig into the details and you look at way up with the bigger picture, I think generally it's for most music artists, it's going to be a negative impact, I think. What's your kind of viewpoint on it, weighing everything up that we've just talked about?
I would agree with your sentiments on that, to be honest. I think you've got to be sensible about how you use technology, and I don't necessarily think all of it's bad. I just think it's how it's used. So yes, like in your position, it has proved a highly successful tool to use, and made life very, very easy. And you still got the option to go down the other route of analog, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, it's always about answering the question a bit more directly. Is the digital even destroying the music industry? It's quite a direct question, and it is. I think it is. Well, it is destroying the music industry, but I suppose, well, how is it destroying the music industry? Is it? And we've obviously give some examples. It's the best way to sum it up for me. I don't know. I mean, it's not destroying it from your standpoint, is it? Because you are involved with the music industry, right? So it's not destroy. It's making things a bit easier for you, but it is destroying the music industry in terms of
I think
where I am, position I'm in.
Yeah, but without you, I don't exist. And this is the problem.
Yeah, but without you, we don't exist. Well, no, but we can do it in house. Yes.
Yeah, but I think kind of looking at it from a kind of a broad picture is, if music artists have less money, okay, then they're not going to be able to invest in me and pay for my services. So it's in my interest for music artists to have money. This is why I'm always like, people, I don't want to get too political, but a lot of people are like, okay, well, we need to keep the billionaires happy and stuff because, they've got money, then the rest of it. So what the government does is they put austerity in and they cut things like disability benefits, or the welfare state and all the rest of it. I think that that's a massive, massive mistake, because from an economic point of view, if you put money in the hands of poor people, they will spend it because they have to. If you've got a choice between starving and not, and someone gives you money, you're going to buy food. It's as simple as that. The problem is that extremely rich people don't have to spend their money. And a lot of the time they don't. What they do is they just buy things like houses that they don't even live in and that sort of thing. They'll buy like third homes and all the rest of it. And that's a whole other debate. But
Yeah.
the theory is the same within the music industry, is that the problem I've got is the money's coming in at the top and it's going to things like big tech. It's not filtering down to music artists like it used to pre-digital era. Pre-digital era, it would be the money would go in at the majors, and then the majors would then, and obviously they would take a big cut, and that's a whole other debate, but they would invest that money in new artists, or they would invest it in artists. They would give it in forms of royalties and advances and stuff like that, and production costs, and then that money would come to people like me. If that money is not being given to the artist, then that money cannot come to me. It's a simple, when you put it into that simplistic point of view. I know it's a lot more complicated than that.
No,
in
makes
simple
sense,
terms, that's how this industry works. It's a trickle down economic industry. So if that doesn't happen, if you guys as music artists aren't making any money, which you're not, you can't invest in yourselves, in what would be your music business. So you can't grow your business. You can't grow a business without investment. Yeah, and this is why I was going back to the economy of the country. If you don't invest in the working class, then you're not going to grow the economy, because the working class will then spend their money because they have to. So we're a consumer capitalist society. This is how it works. And that money's not coming down from the top. Everything's going at the top and it's staying there. This is the problem I've got. And the music industry is a reflection of that. And this is something that we need to really address on an industry level, on how we can look at the main culprits of where that money's going. And when you've got someone like Daniel Ek investing $1 billion in big tech, that's one individual that we need to look at, and how Spotify is paying people and how Spotify money works. And we generally do that through regulation and taxation. Well, if they're not being regulated and they're not being taxated, then they're not going to do it. I mean, they're a business at the end of the day. They're going to be like, well, this is what's his business. If you don't like it, it's your problem. At the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
it's a yes or no answer then, from me.
It is a yes and no, but I think ultimately it depends on whether this is a sustainable thing. It's whether or not we can keep driving money out of the industry. At some point, the industry will collapse.
Well, it is.
There's just no money. It's,
I think we are reaching, this is where the saturation point is now.
Yeah.
And inevitably, I think that what will happen if we carry on going down this road is that it will implode in on itself.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Both of our listeners. We love you immensely. Don't forget to subscribe and do all the bits that help us, because, well, we do this out of the kindness of our own hearts. And anything that you guys can do to help us will be immensely appreciated. So hit the follows, the likes, the subscriptions, and all the other bits. And I hope you have a nice day. Bad Life Podcast!